Now let's look at loops. So we're going to start with a while loop, and I'm going to go back to my if.html and I'm going to save as, and let's call this while.html. And then we're going to need some more content, so I'm going to go back to my cute animal search, and let's go ahead and open this in a new tab. Oops, that's just a toy animal. We don't want that. Let's just go back one and go to images. Oh, it's cute. Okay, and we'll right click and open image in new tab. And we'll save this image as pig.jpg. And let's go ahead and right click on that one, open image in new tab. That's just the thumbnail. So open image in new tab, and we'll save this as panda. And let's just pick one more. So there's a cute fennec. I think the aspect ratio is wrong on that, but we'll go ahead. So is it ICK or IC? Let's check that. Oh, fennec. Okay. Okay, so now we have 4 animals. And so the first thing I'm going to do, let's go ahead and add a header h2. So this is cute puppy. And then I'm just going to copy this whole div box and let's go ahead and make 4 copies of that. So first one's puppy, second one is pig, third one is panda, and fourth one is fennec. So puppy, piggy, panda, fennec, and then the JPEGs, pig, panda, fennec. And then we're not going to need this checkbox here, so I'm going to go ahead and get rid of that. And I'm also going to get rid of this JavaScript code and reload. Oh, so actually I'm going to go here and then let's go to while.html. All right, so we have our puppy, piggy, panda, and fennec. So now what I'm going to do for this one is I'm going to have a drop-down selection menu that has 4 options. And when you change the selected option, it's going to show that content. And it's only going to show that content. So instead of showing all 4 of them, I'm only going to show one. And whichever one is selected in the selection menu, that's what's going to be shown. And so the hiding and showing, I'm going to use the same basic code as I did for the checkbox. But when the selection is changed, I'm going to iterate through each of the options using a loop. So let's go ahead and put together a selection box. And that's going to be select and then option value equals, and what I'm going to use for the value is the ID for each of the matching div boxes, just to keep the code easy. So the first one is going to be puppy content, and the text of the selection is puppy. And then let me copy this and paste 4 and close this. Actually, I already have the select close. So piggy, panda, fennec. And this is pig content. Panda, fennec. And let's see how we're doing so far. So I'm going to reload. All right, so now I have my little drop down. And just like with the checkbox, every time I change the selection, I'm going to get an on change. And so I need to create a change handler, on change handler. So let's go ahead and select. I'm going to put an ID on this. Call this animal chooser. And then an on change, I'm going to call change chooser, like so. And then I'll define the function change chooser. And once again, we'll start just by console log got change. So let's go ahead and reload. And I'm going to pull up the console. And if I change, I got my change. All right, so now what I want to do inside of the change function is I want to get the options associated with the selection. And so first, let's start by getting the selection itself. And I'm going to do that the same way as I got the div box before. I'm going to use document.getElementById, and then I think that was animal chooser. So there's my animal chooser. And let's go ahead and set chooser equal to that. And then chooser.options, that returns my 4 choices. So option 0 is an object that has a lot of stuff in it, but basically this is the puppy, label puppy. And option 1, that's going to have label piggy, and so on. So if I want to know how many options there are, I can use length to get that. So I find out there's 4, and they're numbered 0, 1, 2, 3. So a loop that's going to go through each of these would look like this. So let's go ahead and here, I'll start by getting the chooser. And then let's start with just a while loop. So I'll have a count. Counter is 0 while counter less than options.length do console.log checking plus options sub counter, and we'll learn more about the square bracket syntax next week or in 2 weeks when we talk about arrays. Dot label. So this should loop through all 4 options and print the name of all 4 options. So, oh, and that didn't quite work because I forgot to increment my counter. So I can say counter equal counter plus 1. And then in JavaScript, there's shorthand for this statement. So if you have like counter equal counter plus some number, counter equal counter times some number, and so on, shorthand to do the same thing is plus equal. So counter plus equal 1 means the same as counter equal counter plus 1. And then counter plus equal 1 can also write as that. So plus plus is an increment operator, and those are talked about in the book this week. But I'm going to use that to start with. And then let me reload. And it's still running in the background. You can't actually tell, but it is. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to copy that URL and I'm going to close the tab because I had an infinite loop, and then I'm going to reload. So piggy, so checking puppy, piggy, fennec, panda, and fennec. And then I'm also going to log the options sub counter dot value and options sub counter dot selected. So selected is what I'm going to use to determine which one was selected. And then panda, I see that panda is selected and the value is panda content, which would mean I want to show the panda and hide everything else. So piggy is selected and everything else would be hidden. So what I'm going to do in this loop is I'm going to use an if statement. If option sub counter dot selected, then that means I want to show the div box that has this ID. So document dot get element by ID option sub counter dot value. So that gets me the div box that matches that selection dot style display equals, and then this is selected, so I want to show it. So I set display to nothing. Else, that means that this item was not the selected one. So I'm going to set the display to none. And let me go ahead and get rid of that. And that should be it. So let's go ahead and reload. So we start out with all of the things shown, which I have to fix. And then I'm going to select panda. So now the panda is showing, and only the panda. And then piggy. And let's make this a little smaller so it all fits on the screen. So piggy, fennec, puppy, panda. And this will work for however many options I have in the selection box. So let's go ahead and fix one thing here. So if I load the page, it starts showing all the options. So what I really want to do is I want to call this change chooser before the first change so that it's only showing this first item. And I could start by just making this one display and make these other ones invisible. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to call this function as soon as the document is finished loading. And the way you do that is in the body tag, you add an event handler for when the document is done loading. So on load equal change chooser. So that causes this function to get called when the document's finished loading, and then it gets called again every time I change the selection box. So I only get puppy now. Okay, and then another thing that I can use this loop for is to actually write these div boxes. But I'm going to save that until we talk about arrays and objects, because really loops are perfect for writing code that's going to go through a list of things in an array. And let's just add one more just to see how easy it is to do. So let's get another cute animal. Oh, quokkas. I think that's a quokka. So let's open image in new tab. Yeah, it's a mother and baby quokka, Australian animal. So there's a quokka. And I'm going to make one more div box. So that's a quokka content. And then add an option. So you'll notice I didn't have to change the code at all. I just changed the markup. And we'll save. And reload. So there's my puppy, piggy, panda, fennec, and quokka. So that's a good sign. When you write code and you don't have to change the code to add content, that means that something's going right.